Hey guys, today we are going to talk about the end of World War One. So, this is your title for today's notes. World War One ends. Before we start talking about that though, quick review of what we've learned so far. So, our first question is, what are the four main causes of World War One? So we should have gotten M for militarism, A for alliances, I for imperialism, and N for nationalism. Now, our short-term cause, what was that? The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That was that one event that happened that sparked everyone to jump into action. Now, what were our two alliances and who was in them? So we've got our Triple Entente, aka the Allied powers, with Russia, France, and Britain. Then we have our Triple Alliance, aka the Central Powers, with Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. Now, I wanted us to think for a second why the United States joined World War One, why they hadn't joined it before, and then what events led to us joining the war. So, why did we wait? Because we had this idea of isolationism, where we were going to mind our own business until somebody else made it our problem. And eventually, Germany made it our problem twice. Once with the sinking of the Lusitania, when it was hit by a German U-boat and sank, killing Americans. And the second time was the Zimmerman Note, when Germany was trying to get Mexico to come and fight America. Now, last class we talked about propaganda. What does the word propaganda mean? How was it used to recruit soldiers? And how was it used on the American home front? So another way of saying that last question is, what were they trying to get the American people to do to help the war? All right, so talking about how the war actually ended, I want you to make sure you write the pink. So, like most major wars, World War I ended with signing a peace treaty. This treaty was called the Treaty of Versailles. So, looking at this green box, on November 11th, 1918, World War I ended. The German government signed an armistice, or an agreement to end the fighting, with the Allies. Over 9 million soldiers were dead, and people felt angry and bitter about the war. The Allies blamed the war on the defeated Central Powers. They thought the Central Powers should make reparations, or payments for the damage of the war. Allied leaders met in Paris, France in January 1919. At the Paris Peace Conference, they decided what would happen next. So make sure you have the words armistice, so an agreement to end fighting. The German government said, okay, we're going to stop fighting. They signed this document with the Allied powers. So going back for a second and thinking about who the Allied powers were. The Allied powers were the Triple Entente, Russia, France, and Britain. The Central Powers was the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy. So Germany said, okay, we'll stop fighting. We agree. The Central Powers, they said the Central Powers should pay reparations. They should pay for all the damages of the war. Now, President Wilson, America's president, had this idea called the 14 points. This was his idea for peace. So make sure we write this down. He said peace agreements should be made openly instead of in secret. So he was saying, let's not hold secret meetings. We need everyone to know about this. He wanted militaries to be made smaller, but most importantly, he hoped for more international peacekeeping organizations. So today we have peacekeeping organizations that include lots of countries. But at the end of World War I, that didn't exist yet. And that was one of his major ideas. Now, I want you to answer this question. What would be a benefit of his points? So, looking at his actual 14 points, it says open diplomacy. So, like speaking out in the open, not behind closed doors. Freedom of the seas. Removal of economic barriers, so everyone being able to trade with each other. Reduction of armaments. I'm so sorry, I can't talk today. Reduction of armaments. Adjustments of colonial claims. So adjustment of like the places that people controlled and imperialism. Conquered territories in Russia. Preservation of Belgian sovereignty. So making sure that Belgian people can still vote and that it is still its own country. Restoration of French territory, so giving land back to France. Redrawing of Italian frontiers, so changing the borders of Italy. Division of Austria-Hungary, so remember the country that Franz Ferdinand was from, that was controlling parts of Serbia and other places. They wanted to divide that big country up. Redrawing the Balkan boundaries. Limitations on Turkey, so the country of Turkey, they wanted to limit their power. Establishment of an independent Poland, so Poland didn't quite exist yet, they wanted to make that happen. And the creation of an association of nations, so the creation of an organization where countries are all working together. So pick one of these and tell me what would the benefit be, especially thinking about having smaller militaries and having a peacekeeping organization. So one of the first things the representatives agreed on was to create an international League of Nations. In this league, a group of nations would work together to keep the peace for all. More than 40 nations joined. The countries agreed to talk about problems instead of going to war. They also promised to back each other up if any nation threatened one of them. Although the League of Nations was President Wilson's dream, the United States did not join the group. So today we have the United Nations. People talk about NATO a lot recently. The League of Nations was kind of like both of those, but it was the first one that existed. And 40 countries around the world joined, but the United States didn't, even though it was their president's idea, our president's idea. So answer this question. What was the purpose of the League of Nations? Why did it exist? Now, at this Paris Peace Conference, where they're trying to come up with an agreement of how to end the war and how to create peace after World War I, other Allied leaders had different ideas than Wilson. Georges Clemenceau, a French leader, wanted to weaken Germany so it could never threaten France again. The British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, also requested harsh punishments for Germany. Representatives from other countries made their own demands. So lots of different countries had lots of different ideas. But one really big idea was that a lot of people wanted to weaken Germany because, remember, they were kind of like the bullies during World War I, where there were rules to war and they were like, I'm going to do whatever I want. Unrestricted submarine warfare, committing atrocities, doing terrible things all over Europe. So people wanted to limit and weaken Germany so that they couldn't attack people like that anymore. So, with the signing of the treaty that ended the war, in June of 1919, the Allies and the Germans met at the Palace of Versailles, which is in France, to sign the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty forced Germany to take blame for the war, and there were 3 major punishments given to Germany. It made Germany pay more than $30 billion in reparations. The treaty limited the size of Germany's military. It also gave hundreds of square miles of territory back to France. And finally, the treaty took away Germany's overseas colonies. So Germany was already mad about imperialism because they were late to the game and didn't get a lot of places. And now even the small amount of places they had were being taken away. So, answering this question, what were the 3 punishments that the Treaty of Versailles put on Germany? So, the Germans didn't sign this because they wanted to. They didn't agree to those punishments. The Germans signed the Treaty of Versailles because they had no choice. The Allies drew up separate treaties with the other Central Powers. So, England, Russia, France, and their allies, they wrote up a different treaty for Germany, for Austria-Hungary. They set up a different one for Italy. These treaties changed the map of Eastern Europe completely. Areas that once belonged to Germany and other Central Powers were now independent nations. The Central Powers were not happy with the terms of these treaties at all. This resentment or this anger about the treaties would hurt international relations for years to come. So all of these changes that happened after World War I, all the punishments that were put on these different countries, caused a lot of tension between countries in Europe. But let's look at this map of Europe from before and after World War I. So looking at our Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy. So this is all of Germany before World War I. And then when we look at after World War I, they cut pieces of Germany out and they created Poland. They created Prussia. They created Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, even taking parts of Russia to make this happen. And we see some familiar names. So Belarus, Russia's still here. The Ukraine at this point now belongs to Russia, Moldova. Then when we look at Austria-Hungary, remember this is where Franz Ferdinand was from. It was this huge chunk right here. And if we look after World War I, we had this tiny country of Austria, this tiny country of Hungary. They separated them. Then we had the country of Czechoslovakia in the same area. We have Yugoslavia coming off of that. We have Romania, which did exist already, but now it's becoming larger. So they're separating these huge powers. They're separating Germany a little bit, and they're really separating this Austria-Hungary, the country of Austria-Hungary, changing lots of things. So what you're going to do now is you're going to go into Canvas, and I also put this in the list of your assignment for today, but it's called End of World War I Assignment.